Morning. Another day, another real world test. Today, we're doing on the Sony Xperia Pro-I. The I stands for imaging because apparently this is a camera first and a phone second, which we'll test out today. Now, if you're not familiar, I'm gonna use this phone as my normal phone. My SIM card's even in it. I'm gonna take photos on it and videos and put those up on the screen and compare it to other devices so you can see how it does. We'll also talk about some of the features I like and don't like, and we'll explore a bit. Today's gonna be a travel day, by the way, because I actually have a flight to catch, so we'll test along the way. But, first things first. Coffee, check. This is a coffee shop I like to come to when it's nice out, at least, because they only have seating outside. But it's called dépanneur, and it actually translates from French to convenience store, which is kind of what it is. It's more of like a fancy general store, though, really. But they do have good sandwiches, albeit slightly pricey, and good coffee. Now, since this phone, again, is being touted more as a camera with the benefits of a phone, and it's so similar to the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III, besides the fact that this doesn't have wireless charging, the main camera sensor is different, and so is the telephoto, which we'll talk about a bit later. But because of all that, I'm not gonna spend too much time on the phone part of all this, except where it pertains to helping the camera part of this. Now, some of the things that are important from the phone side for a camera are the fact that we have an OLED 4K 120 hertz display-ish. Now 4K is 3840 by 2160, and this has a 3840 by 1644 resolution, but that's partially because it has a 21 by 9 very narrow display aspect ratio. And frankly, I like that aspect ratio on this phone. There's something about it, it's skinny and it's tall, it feels nice, and it's a lot easier to do things one-handed that are at least on the bottom of the display, like typing. Now it also has an HDR BT 2020 screen, so that you can display HDR content on it, which it can shoot in, which we'll talk about later. Now both that resolution and HDR are not on all the time. In fact, you have to turn on creator mode in the settings to get that to work, or you can have it automatically turn on creator mode depending on what's on the screen. And I imagine all of this is to, of course, save battery. But it turns out most of the time that the resolution is actually 2518 by 1096. Now I'm gonna leave it on all of the default auto modes for this video so we can see how that does with the battery by the end. And that also includes the fact that the 120 hertz display is also a setting that is off by default, and you have to turn it on. And it seems like it bins it at 120 hertz, which just means that it refreshes the screen 120 times a second versus the normal 60 times that we're more used to, which makes for smoother animations and scrolling and gaming, etc. But it isn't adaptive like a lot of the other phones that we're used to seeing. So if you turn on that 120 hertz, it will just lock it at 120, which will use more battery. Now again, as that is off by default, I'm also gonna leave that off because on my camera, I don't need a 120 hertz display necessarily, unless I'm trying to play back that 120 frame per second footage. It's also IP68 rated, and so it can handle being dunked underwater, unlike most real cameras, and has a strap hole for the wrist strap, which is nice. It also has a micro SD card, which feels kind of important for a camera, and 512 gigs of internal storage. It also has 5G, but in the sub-6 variety, not millimeter wave like the Xperia Pro has. So since that's the 5G that you're gonna see most of the time anyway, not a big deal. And we also have Wi-Fi 6. To round out the connectivity. And the idea here is that transferring photos and videos off of the device, as if it's like your camera that's always connected, will be faster because of those things. And lastly, we have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, which is good for plugging in a better pair of headphones to listen to the audio. But more importantly for this, I think you can actually use it to set up external microphones and plug them in to capture better audio. And of course you can do that with like 3.5 millimeter to Lightning or USB-C adapters, but it's just nice to have one less dongle always. Now real quick though, if you wanted to watch your images or videos or anything else on a slightly larger screen than this, well, maybe we should talk about today's sponsor, XGIMI.
This is the XGIMI Horizon Pro, and it's a true 4K projector that can produce crisp images even at sizes up to 300 inches. And a super cool feature I noticed while setting it up was the fact that it has ISA, or Intelligent Screen Alignment. It can not only automatically focus the minute you point it at a surface, so no more manual focusing, but it can also adjust the keystone correction. So if it's aimed at an angle, it'll adjust to make the screen perfectly rectangular again. And it can also automatically avoid obstacles that are in the way. It's nuts. But with 2200 NZ lumens, it's bright enough to be used in bright daylight or used after the sun goes down for a properly cinematic movie night. It also runs Android TV and has Chromecast built in, so you can just select the projector from your Sony Xperia Pro-I, for example, or any Chromecast device, and it'll play on the projector instantly. Check out the Horizon Pro at the link below, and thanks to XGIMI for sponsoring this video.
Okay, now we're rushing home to pack because, again, I have to leave for a flight and I'm running a little behind. Okay, let's hurry up and pack. Okay, let's go. Thank you. Thank you very much. I love when people are just stoked about their job. What a lovely person. In the air, but I'm actually heading to LA to test out Verizon's new C-band 5G network, which is like their new frequency for their 5G. I have a whole decoder episode. I'll leave a link to that below that explains why all 5Gs are different and not created equal if you're curious. But while we're on this flight for the next 6 hours, let's talk about the main event of this phone, the camera.
We have a 12 megapixel ultra-wide f2.2 aperture 16mm equivalent sensor. It's the same as the Xperia 1 Mark III again. And we have a 12 megapixel f2.4 2x optical zoom telephoto camera, but we have what Sony is calling their 1-inch type 12 megapixel main sensor. Now the 1-inch type part is because it is supposedly the same sensor from their point and shoot, the RX100 Mark VII, but it seems like they only use 12 megapixels of the 20.1 megapixel sensor. So it's not using the full 1-inch, of course. Now, it's still a decently large sensor and has 2.4 micron sized pixels, so it will let in a ton of light. And as with others in this size range, it'll also make for some nice natural bokeh or the blur between the subject and background for photos and videos without the need for software gimmicks to do so. Frankly, even if it's not using the full 1-inch sensor, it is still a very capable sensor for a phone. The camera app, now called Photo Pro, has a basic mode which allows you to select auto and use the camera just like you would any other smartphone camera. We'll get into the other ways you can use it later, but the results aren't bad at all. The one thing that you will notice though is that Sony lacks the computational photography skills that the usual players have perfected over the years, like Google, Apple, and Samsung. And so, to most people's eyes, those cameras are going to look better straight out of the phone. They can balance the highlights and shadows better, they sharpen the image automatically as you take it, and all these other edits that they just do when you snap the photo that Sony just isn't quite on the same tier with. Now, things do change a bit though, if you want to take the time to shoot in RAW format, aka the raw data from the sensor, instead of the JPEG like normal, and then edit it. But we'll talk about that a bit later. Something else worth noting about the Sony Xperia Pro-I camera is the fact that we have a dual aperture. So, you can choose between f2 to get a shallower depth of field and let in more light, or f4 to get more in focus. We've seen something like this actually on the Samsung S9 series back in the day, but the difference here is that you can control when it switches compared to Samsung's software that used to do it for you. Now it's a small thing, but I commend them for it, honestly, as ideally I'd love to have a fully control aperture on my phone camera one day from like f2.8 all the way to f22 or whatever, so I could decide how much bokeh I would want in the photos and videos. They also did a clever thing with the magnetic variable telephoto lens on the Sony Xperia 1 III that, even though I didn't get a chance to test that, is still just clever and innovative, and more of what I want to see in phone cameras going forward. Now, another couple of things that makes this feel more like a regular camera hardware-wise, again, we'll get to software and other things later, is the proper shutter button. It's honestly something I miss from when phones used to have it. The biggest benefit of it, besides the muscle memory of having a dedicated camera button, is the ability to half press to focus and full to take the photo, like my proper Sony camera does. And then we have the front camera, which is, well, it's less impressive.
By the way, the battery died here on the plane, so here is my usage for anyone who's curious. And here's another more normal day that I wasn't doing a real world test and using the camera as much, so that you have something to compare.
It's our pleasure to welcome you to Los Angeles for local time is 6:41.
Made it to LA. Now I have to get a lift to the hotel. Thank you. Made it to the hotel. And we're in a neighborhood in Los Angeles called downtown LA. I'm here at a hotel called the Wayfarer, which I looked online and found and it seemed kind of cute. Very minimalistic, which I'm into. I mean, very. That's it. That's basically the room. But kind of cute. It even has like, I mean, I guess what I would call a standing desk with a chair. But it's a standing desk if you want it to be. Now, while we're here though, I want to talk about the video on this phone. So for video, we can shoot in 4K at a 24 frame per second drop frame, all the way up to 120 frames per second in 4K drop frame as well. But that last one is pretty unique. Essentially, you can shoot in 4K 120, and the benefit of that as a video editor is that it allows you to then play with the speed of the clip, all the way down to 1/5 of the speed. So if you change like a 24 frames per second playback, you'll get some very smooth, pretty slow motion. And this is cool because unlike most phones where you actually have to choose slow-mo when you're gonna record it to get at least slow motion that slow, it automatically comes out as slow motion. There's no way to then put it back to normal or speed it up or anything like that. Whereas this, I can take the 120 frames per second footage and put in a timeline and just render it out as normal. And it just will be normal motion. Or I can slow it all the way down to that 1/5 or any speed in between. It would still look good. It's actually something I used to use a lot on my proper camera, my Sony A7S III. I kind of stopped using it because I felt like I was getting too used to it and felt like it was a creative crutch and I was leaning on it too much. But it is still a cool feature to be able to use, and every now and then, I mean, it just is real good for coffee montages. Not gonna lie. Now, something a little confusing, we have 3 different apps for recording video on this phone. You can just use the Photo Pro app and tap video to shoot in the most like a normal phone, quick and auto type of way, or you can use the Video Pro app to get a lot more controls. You can leave things in auto, but you can also manually control shutter speed, ISO, white balance. You can zoom in smoothly with a slider, and even use a similar slider to rack focus, as in having one subject in focus and move to another while blurring out the original. Something I actually have said that I wish the iPhone 13s could do with their regular video. They can do it in cinematic mode where they do like a fake blurring. It's almost like portrait mode video, but I honestly just want it in regular video mode. And this allows you to do that. Now, I will say that I wish it had focus peaking, which is where it highlights the things that are in focus. So it's just a lot easier to tell when you are racking focus back and forth like that, what's in focus and what isn't, but at least you could do it. And lastly, you have Cinema Pro, which according to Sony, Video Pro is for more controls, but easier to share. And Cinema Pro is for people who want to edit after they shoot. And that's because it tries to mimic Sony's most expensive camera, the Sony Venice. And it requires editing after the fact to look good, really. It shoots in HLG HDR automatically in H.265, which just means it'll have more colors and contrast, but is also more of a pain to edit for various reasons. It also shoots in 2.39:1, a common movie aspect ratio, but does give you guides for other aspects if you want to use those to then edit the shot to those aspects later. And it has a bunch of different looks, or LUTs is what they really are, which are lookup tables, and essentially tell the image what shade to make each color to fundamentally adjust the look and bake it into the footage, versus say a filter that would just throw a look on top of the already baked in footage, if that makes sense. Okay, and considering we time traveled 3 hours back by coming to this coast, I think we should just go out somewhere, because otherwise I'm gonna fall asleep. And if I do that, then I'll wake up super early and the cycle will never end. So we're gonna stay up a little later to fix the jet lag.
Okay, found a little speakeasy inside my hotel called Lily Rose.
It has a slightly disheveled on purpose look that I kind of like. And right now, it's very much like Christmas threw up in here. And the cocktails are all holiday themed. I'm not mad at it.
Now, if you shoot in RAW and end up editing the photos after the fact, the Sony's hardware does give it a bit of an edge at that point. And frankly, I've also noticed that the Sony's cameras are a bit more consistent than most Android phones between the ultra-wide main and telephoto. Now, another thing that they got right was the camera has the most impressive autofocus I think I've seen on a phone. It mimics the UI from the Sony Alpha series to show you when you have press what points are being focused on before you take the photo, and it's pretty accurate. You can also tap to focus as usual, and it'll track that as well. Also, it can do face tracking as well as eye tracking, which again comes from the proper cameras, and all of that's just cool to see on the phone.
Okay, calling it a night. It is 11 p.m. or so, California time, which means it's 2 a.m. my time. I'm very tired, but made it. It's the thing you gotta do when you cross time zones is like just fight it so that you just are on the new time zone basically by the next day, hopefully. Some final thoughts on the phone. I appreciate what Sony is trying to do and involving the Alpha team who makes all of their proper cameras. And ultimately to see any of the real camera features, whether that's a larger sensor or just like the way they do things, come down to a phone, and even maybe some of the phone stuff like computational photography maybe make its way a little bit, if optionally, to the larger cameras. Like those worlds I feel like should be closer together than they actually are. And so I appreciate that Sony is at least trying to do that. But the truth of the matter is this phone is $1,800. And that puts it in a very weird place because as a camera with phone features,
I'd rather buy a Sony ZV-E10, for example, and get multiple lenses and get a much better image and video quality for way less money, and just connect it to my phone via the Sony imaging app available for all phones like usual.
To me, in my mind, those are two different things. I like having a phone that I can take in the moment shots and it's already kind of looks good as soon as I take it, and I can share that to social and whatever. When I want to like take my time and maybe have some more intent behind it, then I'm going to take my real camera. I just feel kind of like this phone sits in between these two very distinct worlds that most people are used to and doesn't really pull you from either to want to use it, at least for the price. But you guys let me know in the comments below. Always appreciate hearing from you guys about the phone. What do you think of this concept? Do you like it? Let me know. Again, like to hear from you. Also, what you thought of this video? It's my normal little weird format. Hope you guys still like it. But yeah, let me know about that in the comments as well.
Thanks again to XGIMI for sponsoring this video. You can check out the Horizon Pro projector at the link below.
As always though, regardless, thanks for watching.
And I imagine someone's drilling something now. I have to catch a flight. I'm not gonna make it. I can't win. It's sold out everywhere I go. Doesn't matter.